Yeah, you know what I love about BridgeUSA? They used to be called BridgeCal. You might recognize that name because that's the group that was formed after the Milo Yiannopoulos protest that left our school in shambles, both physically and metaphorically. Now, the whole idea is that you can walk into a discussion held by a BridgeUSA chapter and you won't be knocked off your feet with partisan rhetoric. No, you can discuss policies based on a solid amount of reasoning and stay fairly centrist. That way, you don't create enemies for no reason and you actually kind of get somewhere with the discussion. That's why I love to have representatives from this organization on. And today, we're going to have one of the board members. I think he was also involved in founding the group. His name is John Ryder, and you would not believe that he's a second-year geography student here at Cal. Listen to the way he speaks, listen to what he has to say, and you know what? He makes good points, and that's what matters. Anyway, without further ado, just kidding, there's a bit of further ado. There's one more plug I would like to make. Presidential Actions. That's an app written by a Cal student after the Milo protest and after President Trump responded to our demonstration by threatening to cut Berkeley's federal funding. So this is his revenge. The app is amazing. I use it all the time. It's probably one of the most used apps on my phone. It's basically an app that it notifies you every time there's a presidential action and also when there's a town hall. So you can actually get involved rather than hashtagging. So that's good on us, eh? Millennials. Anyway, now seriously, without further ado, here's the podcast with John Ryder. Alright, we're probably good to start here actually. Mm-hmm. So let's go back to media as a fourth estate. That's
the fourth estate, yeah. I think it should be treated more like the fourth estate in that media has a responsibility. And also, like, we shouldn't...
Oh, shit.
Do you want to start over? Or do you want to roll with it?
We don't start over.
We don't start over. Okay. We don't start over.
Camera just locked up, but alright, let's go again.
So two things. We shouldn't refer to the media monolithically because it's not. It's not just some, like, backroom... cable cabal, whatever it's called, of people like pulling the strings for television, right? That's not a thing. It's a collection of mediums, be that Breitbart, MSNBC, CNN, Fox, etc., and they collectively form this means of information dispersal, which we call the media. I think it should be treated like a fourth estate in that it should be more responsible for the effects of its discourse. I think it also needs to be more woke to the fact that it has a very real effect on American politics. To call it the fourth estate is to refer to and recognize the very real political power it has. And you should most especially be aware of this after the 2016 election, but even before then. I mean, Hamilton and Jefferson owned newspapers, right? As if I remember right, Hamilton and Jefferson just owned newspapers, and they would use it to basically, like, fling disparaging advertisement at each other. Like, that's crazy. We think our media is too partisan now. That's bizarre. If we recognize it as the facet of the government that it is, without necessarily, like, regulating speech, because that gets its own brand of very, very politically dangerous. If we grant it the power of referring to it as the fourth estate, then we should also imbue in it the responsibility that being a political entity entails. So we were talking about this before we went on. My feelings toward the media are largely shaped by a 1993, 1997 book, one of those two dates, by a media theorist from UPenn whose name is Joseph Turow. And he actually does this fascinating thing. He looks at the structure of media, whereby its revenue is predicated primarily on targeted advertising, which is fair. I mean, it is. It is. You know, that mode might be changing as advertising advertising is seen as a reason to pivot away from certain medias. I mean, you see the rise of places like Netflix, HBO Go, for example, and the decline of cable, right? But like, regardless, that's not the current media mode we're in right now. In the current media mode we're in right now, news networks like CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, Breitbart, etc., they derive their profits primarily from the fact that they are vehicles for advertising. So Trudeau points to the present structure of news media and media in general and says, well, it is not the fact that commercial breaks are scheduled into programming, so to speak. It's not that advertising is like scaffolded into programming. In fact, programming is built around advertising in order to be more competitive. As more channels come out, as more programs come out, you need to be able to attract more advertising money. Well, how do you do that? You guarantee higher sales by having a more homogenous group that you reach out to. So if, for example, I'm selling Viagra, chances are I'm not selling that to women, right? So like, if I have an audience, but I also want to like measure the effectiveness of my advertising by, let's say, percentage. I don't know how it works. I'm not in the back rooms. If I'm trying to sell Viagra, then if you're feeding me, like our program was watched by 1 million people, right? But if 50% of those people are women, then in reality, I'm only reaching 500,000 consumers that I want. So if I'm looking to have my advertising be more effective, I'm going to look towards programs which are more efficient at targeting for men. So let's say I look at another program which is structured such that it attracts a viewer base of 70% men, 30% women. That means I'm reaching 200,000 more potential consumers than I would have been in the other format. And that means that my advertising is by and large more effective. Let's say Vicodin is really appealing to white men. Specifically, let's look at the ethnic breakdown. If that's 700,000, let's say that 400,000 of them are white. And I want to sell my Viagra most effectively. So again, I'm going to look towards a different program. Let's say a different program, let's call it Fox News, attracts more white men who need my Viagra than MSNBC or CNN. And maybe that's true. I don't know. I haven't looked at their demography. But let's say they have a ratio of like 70% of their audience is white men. And I know I can sell Viagra more effectively, so I'm going to advertise to that medium which targets more efficiently. So over time, we have created a medium which is more homogenous in its viewer base and is targeted specifically to exclude other people which do not fit into the mold of the consumer I want. Advertising is now dictating the content and the structure of the content to attract the viewers it wants to. So Trudeau points to this and basically says, well, look, this same platform, this same mode of transmitting political media is now, it's our news, it's our political truth, so to speak. So that which is more divisive is more targeted. That which is more targeted and more audience homogenous is going to derive more profits for me. So I'm going to advertise on that. And like evolution, whereby each successive generation has certain more competitive forms thrive and other forms just kind of shrivel and die, eventually what this means is we have hyper-targeted media. Let's look at RuPaul's Drag Race. A homophobic white man in rural Louisiana is not going to watch RuPaul's Drag Race. Or maybe they will, I don't know. But the point is, I would imagine that they don't. And if that is true, then it would be silly for anybody who's using their products to target that, to put their advertising on RuPaul. But let's say that RuPaul's Drag Race is highly trafficked by like homosexual men in San Francisco. I don't know if that's true. Let's say it is. Then if I'm trying to target my product at them, I'm going to keep advertising on that program. And if I want to drive away more people who aren't going to consume that product, then I'll tell the program, like, look, you need to exclude more homophobic white men from Louisiana because they're diluting the effectiveness of my advertisement. Of course, this is not a conversation that actually happens, but it's implied through the structure. So That's a basic and very poor recapitulation of the argument of Joseph Turo's Breaking Up America. Again, from either 1993 or 1997, I can't remember, but it's still fairly relevant. Actually, I would say it's still immensely relevant, especially in light of this recent election campaign and the whole argument surrounding fake news, which really should more appropriately be called targeting news or partisan news. So it's super relevant. I think what's interesting is where that literature intersects with the work of a theorist named Benedict Anderson. So Benedict Anderson in 1984 publishes a book called Imagined Communities. And Imagined Communities' thesis, basically, is that the idea of the nation, and we talked about this earlier, but I'll clarify it again. A nation is not a state. A state is a country, as one typically conceives of a nation. So, for example, a state is the Czech Republic. A state is England. A state is China. Excuse me. A nation, and I just named 3 nation states, kind of. Like China gets frisky about it. But a nation state would be like, I don't know, the Czech Republic. Like, by and large, it is the Czech people. The Czech people are a nation. They imagine themselves as one homogeneous ethnic community. But they also have a state attached. So, anyway, Benedict Anderson says that nations form themselves around a shared participation in media. And he doesn't articulate it quite that way, right? He says that like communities imagine themselves insofar as they consume the same literature, consume the same vernacular language. It's easier to imagine a community surrounding yourself if you are all consuming the same cultural product. So he uses this beautiful metaphor. Oddly enough, I think another page was like 17 or something. But he uses this beautiful metaphor of a newspaper, right? So newspaper readers implicitly imagine themselves as participants in the nation of that newspaper because every single day they're consuming the same base of information, they're consuming the same opinions, they're consuming the same language. If you see someone who reads your newspaper, you feel this slight kinship with them, right? And if you apply that as like revolutionary anti-imperialist literature in Indonesia or in Latin America, then the shared consumption of that literature sparks in you the same sort of ideas. You feel a kinship with the people that are consuming the same media as you, and you imagine yourselves as part of a community. I'm not explaining this well. Like, maybe you're following it, but like I'm not. The book you should read the book. It's phenomenal. And it's like, what, 33 years old, but it's still good, still relevant. The idea basically is like, so if we're all consuming the same media, then we conceive of ourselves as an imagined community, and an imagined community is a nation. A nation is a community which is so large that no one member can personally know every single member of that nation. And yet, they still feel like that they have this body underpinning them. So like presumably both of us are part of families. That is a community. It's not an imagined community because I know all of my siblings, I know my parents. So let's extend that out to ethnicity. I identify myself as Irish. I don't know everyone who identifies as Irish. I mean, shit, like half of Massachusetts, right? You know? So that would be a nation because I can't know that's an imagined community and therefore a nation because I can't know everyone who's in it. So anyways, if we have media which is growing increasingly polarized against itself and splintering more and more and more into target groups, as Turow argues, and in light of Anderson's work, we base our imagined communities, our communities of self, along shared participation in the same media, then what we should be seeing in the United States is a fracturing of nation. Mind you, I'm not saying that the United States is breaking up into like a civil war or that we are from wholly different like bodies of truth. That one actually might be true. But as we increasingly don't consume the same media, we grow further and further apart. And Josh Katz in 2016 or I think January of 2017 for the New York Times did he mapped out the consumption of the most popular television shows in the United States. He calls it like Modern Family or Duck Dynasty, right? And there's little to no geographical overlap between consumer bases of like Modern Family and Duck Dynasty. And through his work, he found that there are 3 mega regions in the United States, basically, that consume a similar media base. He says that there's like the urban metropoles, which is like, Clinton's America, so to speak, this progressivist, urban, hip, liberal community. There is the rural, conservative voting communities. You could call that like Modern Family and Duck Dynasty, respectively. And then there's a third one, which he calls the extended Black Belt, which is black communities, predominantly in former slave territories, so the Southeast, but then also, actually, oddly enough, perfectly following a lot of the African diaspora into the rest of the United States. So you'll see places like Chicago or I don't know, Kansas, and New York consuming a lot of the same media as places like Atlanta and Dallas, and he calls that the Black Belt. So you could consider that like empire. So we have these 3 nations, so to speak. Well, we don't. He doesn't say that, but we have these 3 communities consuming the same. Yeah, and Thoreau would say, well, you see that there's no overlap because the programs are structured so as to not overlap, because that's the most market-conducive strategy. And then you see ideations of self. Well, that correlates hugely with political participation. So a lot of the people who are watching Duck Dynasty, because of the values implicitly mortised into that television show, or otherwise, are voting for Donald Trump. And you see a lot of the people who are in the zone of the Modern Family nation are voting for Hillary Clinton. I don't know how the Black Belts voted. I didn't look into that. But these patterns of media dispersal and media consumption have very real political impacts. So to kind of tie it into my claim that media should be treated as the fourth estate, if you can see very clearly that the current structure of media has a measurable effect on political behavior, and you can see that media is gradually growing more and more polarized and target group specific, that's really, really dangerous. Right?
So because how do you think we can reverse this direction? We can see that systematically.
I don't know. That's the short answer, right? The short answer is I don't know, because I also don't. I will cautiously say right now that I don't think this is not a statement that should be cautious necessarily. I will cautiously say that the United States should not be regulating what a television program should or should not be able to say. I would have to look more into how the FCC does its regulations, but I even feel kind of bad about censorship. Insofar as they're not explicitly lying to you and telling you, like, the Russians just nuked your hometown, get your gun, kill your neighbor. Like, insofar as it's not explicitly that, I don't know if the government should be able to control what information you are and are not subjected to insofar as it's true. Because that gets dangerous. Then you turn into a state like, I don't think we're going to slippery slope our way into North Korea, right? But that is a state which has complete monopoly on information. It tells all of its citizenry what is true. And obviously that's a dangerous power for a state like that to have. So I voted for Clinton, for example. Like, I would be really fucking scared if Donald Trump had control entirely over the media and was talking about, let's say, internal investigations about Russia, and was telling us, no, everything's fine. In fact, the people who tell you otherwise are traitors. I don't think he would do that. That's besides the point. But you see, if there's like it's too dangerous for such an absolute power to be imbued in a state that we're seeing more and more is fallible. So I don't think we should regulate the media. And the way Thoreau kind of postulates it is almost sort of fatalistic. It says, insofar as profits are based on targeting, then you're going to see this sort of evolutionary dwindling of audience by way of offending the people you don't want to advertise to, and like groveling towards the people you do want to advertise to. So the short answer is I don't know. I think there are steps in the right direction. I think that the media should be held accountable for being completely open in their partisanship, right? I think it's fair to say that Fox is conservative, right? Yeah, and yet, if I brought up that to some of my conservative friends back home in the white suburban sea north of Los Angeles, they'd be, well, no. No, Fox News calls itself fair and balanced. But it's not. It is conservative. Likewise, MSNBC has a liberal slant to it. I mean, there's no avoiding that. Mother Jones has a liberal slant to it. Breitbart is batshit and crazy conservative, right? But insofar as they can posture themselves as absolute truth, then people who don't want to believe that their media is partisan kind of sweep it under the rug. So I think it would be interesting to explore policy ideas that would force media companies to be 100% open about their ideological leanings, right? So like if they are going to persistently posit themselves as a conservative news station or a liberal news station or a progressive news station or whatever, if they're going to continuously do that, they should be out in the open about it. At least then that leaves room to question the information that you're being fed as opposed to it just being abject truth. I think that would be an interesting step forward. I don't know what that would look like in practical policy application because it toes the line of being dangerously sensory. And, like you can always, it would be so hard to demonstrate a concrete ideological leaning. It would be hard to actually, like, I feel at least, like litigiously prove
right,
that
you can't really quantify it.
No, exactly. Because let's say Fox News, in order to avoid this, like airs one progressive leaning story every week. I mean, look, we're balanced, we're fair. So it would be nice if we could have the already unabashedly partisan media outlets be blunt and open about it, but who determines which ones are unabashedly partisan? What apparatus is there that is wholly objective in measuring partisanship? I mean, that just does not exist. I don't know if there's a concrete way forward. I think it's an interesting problem that we should all be aware of. I think we should be doing more towards addressing it. I am not a person to turn to for solutions because at the end of the day, I'm just a second-year geography student here at Cal. You know what I mean?
Right, for sure. But, yeah. Oh, man, that was a mouthful. No, but moving forward, when Imagine Communities was written, that was a different time for media. Moving forward, the fake news, a lot of what fake news referred to.
Sorry, do you mind if I tell Cliff just to, because I know the road that's outside?
Yeah, sure.
Inside.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. The guy outside was a friend of mine from freshman year. So, like, he was a bit more receptive to me being like, hey, we're recording a podcast, can you?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, moving forward, Facebook and Twitter becomes media. It doesn't become, you go to this one channel to get all your information. You go to this one list of all of your favorite things to hear, because that's how the algorithm works. It optimizes so that you hear.
Facebook is a big thing about that. The Facebook, Zuckerberg is an odd duck. Facebook is getting in a lot of trouble for that because it's catering its media information. I mean, that is Thoreau's idea gone rabid. If you can target down to the individual person, then dissenting views are just not going to get it. But conversely, I mean, that's immensely attractive to advertisers. Like, if I can know exactly who is looking at my advertisement, I know exactly what to sell them. This is weird. I was practicing my Spanish with my friend the other day, just around my phone, and suddenly I'm getting advertisements in Spanish because I had the Facebook app open. But that should tell you, like, you can target down to the individual person and just know there's no room for dissenting information, and that's bad. That's immensely dangerous. Because, like, not only does that mean that people who are genuinely backwards in their beliefs are steeped again and again and again in their backwards beliefs, like if you're advertising white supremacy to white supremacists, but it also means that, like, I'm not seeing those white supremacists. I don't know that they're a real problem out there. And that's just my issue-specific interpretation of it because my political leanings, right? Like, it's just to point to that example. But, like, it's immensely dangerous how our media is structured. And, like, I feel like no one's talking about it outside of just, saying fake news this, fake news that, fake news this, fake news that. They're targeting specific instances of it occurring. They're targeting specific mediums, but they're not addressing the system that allows for those mediums to be most profitable. In other words, they're just like they're putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. They're doing nothing to solve the problem under it's bleeding less, but they're not addressing the fact that there's still a fucking bullet in that guy, And I think that's a problem.
Well, it's a difficult issue, and that's why no one's coming up with an actual solution, because somehow you have to get information from people that are actually running this concept of a nation, of a state, and then it's like Chinese telephones, isn't it? That's a derogatory way to call it, but it's okay, because I'm not Chinese. Anyway, it's you know what I mean.
That's another thing.
Information is diluted, and by the time you get it from your next door neighbor, even.
Well, you shouldn't think of it as diluted. You should think about it as refined.
Refined, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the problem. I mean, you are, at the end of the day, you're getting unfettered ideology. That's problematic. You can look at the framing of completely, the same story from two different outlets is catered towards its respective bases. It almost says two entirely different things. It's crazy. I mean, also think about this. So Fox News spent maybe 4 or 5 hours discussing the implicit classism of Barack Obama ordering Dijon mustard for his hot dog. Never mind all the underlying, messed up structures that allow for that to happen. The institutionalized anti-blackness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's not what I'm here to argue about. Plenty of theorists have done that and will continue to do that. But, the fact that partisan drivel, it gets the ratings it does, means that the system is working, And I shouldn't say the system is working because it's not really a beast that can be purposefully controlled insofar as I can tell. The way Thoreau frames it is it's almost consequential of the way we structure our media. I mean, that's crazy, 3 hours spent on Dijon mustard as a blatant dig against a partisan president, and we call that news. But it attracts ratings.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. And also, I just think and this relies on another solution. This relies on consumer responsibility, which just will demonstrate time and time again. That's just something you can't rely on, right? At the end of the day, I don't think I'm on a vegetarian kick right now. I've been vegetarian for the entirety of June. At the end of June, I'm going to eat meat. I know it's not ethical. I know how Tyson treats their chickens, turning them into force meat nuggets. I know that, cattle ranching in Argentina is producing massive amounts of methane that are destroying the globe. I also know that I'm not a responsible consumer, and maybe not. I mean, maybe I'll stick with this thing, right? But at the end of the day, I know that my consumption habits are not responsible. I own a pair of Nike shoes at home. Those were probably made by a child slave. I have to deal with that, right? But it didn't stop me from buying those shoes. I think that's a whole different aside.
We'll have you back for that.
Yeah, iPhone. I mean, think about the way the Foxconn treats its employees poorly.
Right, yeah.
Think about the way that China treats its people poorly. So I think that consumers need to be more responsible about the way that they consume their media, most especially news. News shouldn't be entertainment. I don't even think news should be running 24 hours a day, because if it's running 24 hours a day, you're going to need something to fill those slots to make it market viable, and you're going to do that by filling it with 3 hours of partisan drivel, because that attracts viewers.
So how do you incentivize viewers, the end consumer, to be responsible?
That's what I'm saying. You can't rely on consumer responsibility because, I mean, most especially this, right? You can put tariffs on Nike shoes so that they're prohibitively expensive. Of course, sneakerheads are still going to buy them because sneakerheads are a whole different subculture that I'll never understand. That's commodity fetishism gone rapid. But you can't incentivize media consumption habits. How do you enforce it? How do you look into whether or not they're viewing news as a genuine want for information? These are all very utopian ideas. I think if consumers are more responsible in how they consume media, which they won't be, then we can effectively kill those channels by starving them of the viewership that keeps them alive. But that's not going to happen. Right. And likewise, going to the other solution, I mean, it toes a very fine line of censorship, and there's just no way that I can conceive of to practically apply the idea of forcing channels to blatantly display their partisanship,
But you can
And mind you, I'm not a defeatist about it. I just don't see a solution right now. I just see it as a massive issue that no one's talking about.
But looking ahead, as media evolves, I think it could be an advantage that a lot of people get the news through outlets that advertise themselves through Facebook or Twitter or even Instagram.
I don't think so.
Because you can enforce that algorithmically, right?
Can you?
Or you can.
You're CogSci, right? So I don't know if that's true.
You can. You can tweak it such that you keep track of what sort of sources people are getting their news from.
Yes,
and
but
from there you can use that as a proxy.
But
for
that would rely on a company like Facebook, which is a profit-driven monstrosity, right?
Right. So
that would rely again on effectively forcing them to change their business behaviors. It would be massively complex regulations that I think would also be incredibly hard to enforce, because you got to think about it. Like, Facebook's bottom line is the fact that they are the single most efficient target. I can't think of anything else that would trump them. They are the single most effective way to target consumers. The fact that I can speak for Spanish for like 3 hours next to my phone and suddenly I'm getting advertisements in Spanish means that Facebook is such a refined machine at targeting its advertising that it can do something like that. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't think they're going to give up their golden goose like that. It would be unwise for them to do so.
I think there is a pivot there that's possible out in the distance. But right now, yeah, definitely their model is absolutely not conducive to people.
Yeah, I mean,
consuming.
at the end of the day, us talking about this issue kind of boils down to sophism. You know, we're pointing out an issue, but we don't have solutions for it, and that plagues me a lot. So that's what I want to study here. While I'm here, I want to, think about ways by which to address this very serious problem of, like, effectively the building of separate walled-off nations within the United States. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have the answers right now. Come back to me in 2 years when I'm writing my senior thesis.
All right, I'll get you on the podcast in like 2 years. You know? That's what the podcast is too. I mean, I want to get people on, get as many opinions as possible. Yeah. And 5 years from now, you're going to have something more.
Hope so.
Solid.
That'd be good. So I actually lied when I said that I'm not working towards a solution. I don't know what a solution is. I can think off the top of my head like 2 things that I'm doing right now that we talked about before this podcast that you've reminded me of.
Tell us about it.
Cool. Yeah. So I am right now talking to. Actually, I think it's fairly safe to say that concretely I am working on a project in conjunction with author and sociologist Arlie Hochschild here at the University of California. And she is a professor in the sociology department. She was also the author of the National Book Award finalist in 2016, Strangers in Their Own Land. And so Strangers in Their Own Land was Professor Hochschild's sociological project to basically live in a massively rural and intensely conservative town called Lake Charles, Louisiana, for 5 years. And it just so happened to correlate with, the rise of Donald Trump, so it gained massive amounts of attention when she actually wrote it, because, it basically came just at an immensely opportune time. And it's a really well-written, brilliant book. Like, it's worth your time. It's a good book. But her basic, the crux of her book is that we have built up between what I would call nations, right? Like, based on everything we've just been talking about. We've built up between these nations empathy walls, whereby we can't empathize across partisan lines, specifically across partisan lines. Now, of course, I would say that is predicated more on media consumption, which correlates with partisanship, but that's a digression. So an idea that I brought up to her in conjunction with another individual who's helping me reach out to funders, Bill Shireman, who's another professor here, who's with an organization called Future 500 that I'm actually interning for this summer. Basically, I came forward to her with the idea of, well, look, like, if we can't cross the empathy wall insofar as we are geographically separated, why don't we take emissaries from each respective group and have them flip-flop? So I would like to take a conservative kid from a conservative family, from a conservative town who has conservative beliefs, and basically have them serve as a sort of international student. Because, we do international students with other countries, but it would be wrong to presume that the United States is a homogenous nation body of people. Right. So let's take one of them, have them serve as an international student to a place like Berkeley, and have their progressive kid analog, just steeped in democratic progressivism, have them go to the same town. Basically have them switch places and record, almost like an anthropological project, almost like Malinowski amongst the Trobrians, record their experiences and have them really try and throw away all presuppositions and try and understand how these groups of people come to understand themselves, with the hopes that their testimony will enlighten the fact that, yes, we are in fact different groups of people who come to understand things different ways, and if we're going to communicate effectively, we have to take that into account. So the idea is to develop that into a book. Hopefully we will. I'm also a student here, so I only have so much time. And the idea of moving a high school-aged kid from one place to another is a logistical nightmare. Seriously, it's crazy. We're talking to another group at UC Santa Cruz right now about maybe working in conjunction with them. It's all a whole bunch of foundation so that when we get this off the ground, it doesn't end catastrophically. So I can tentatively say I'm working on hopefully putting that out as a book. But that's a hard tentatively, just because, there are limitations to my reach and also just what is a feasible project right now. On top of that, BridgeUSA, which is an organization I'm on the board of here, that's actually how you met and came to know, yeah. I have a sticker. I actually am the only individual who has that sticker because I ordered a sheet of these stickers, right? For $13, and I got one of them off and put it on my phone, got another one off, put it God knows where, and then the sheet just disappeared. Oh. And I wasn't about to sink $13, I was gonna give these out to other people, man, so this is the only sticker of its kind sitting on the back of my phone. But BridgeUSA is a political organization here at Cal, and the idea was basically following the Milo riots on the night of February 1st, communication just broke down. Regardless of how vitriolic and bad that Milo is, at the end of the day, it shouldn't end in throwing explosives at police officers. At the very least, A, I don't think he should have been invited at all. B, yes, he has a right to speak. Absolutely, he has a right to speak. But he also has a responsibility to understand the consequences of that speech. The fact of the matter is he is a firebrand who was coming to Cal to rile up a reaction and sell a book. That is how I interpreted it. You're free to argue with me against that, but by and large, that's how I saw it happening, right? That's a digression. Anyway, the responsible practice of speech is very important. And we feel on this campus that the Berkeley College Republicans have effectively been rendered into a pariah group. In part, almost, and I won't say by their own action, but the invitation of Milo was, I think, a PR mistake. Basically, BridgeUSA emerged to open a forum and be like, yo, communication broke down. We don't want that to happen again. Because I don't like the idea, that's funny, I know that guy too. I don't like the idea I don't like the idea of my campus being on fire. I don't like that. So we wanted to open a forum where people could constructively and in a moderated but uncensored format express their feelings pertaining to certain political issues respectfully and responsibly, and it's worked out immensely well over the course of this year. We've also invited speakers. We've also failed inviting speakers. On the behest of the Berkeley College Republicans, we worked to help invite and culture to campus, and I think, you saw the police occupation, right? There were for those who aren't aware, there were what felt like 100 police officers on Sproul Plaza, which is the main plaza of the campus, just occupying it militaristically, right? That's crazy. So obviously that didn't work out well, right? But we're baby steps. So one of the things we want to do, there's my sales pitch for BridgeUSA, right? So anyways, through BridgeUSA, we are trying to host a climate conference here at Cal. And you may be thinking, that's about as straightforward as it gets, for Cal is a very progressive, liberal place. They're going to love climate science. We have a college of natural resources. We do massive amounts of work to talk about the very true and very real anthropogenic climate change that is plaguing the world. Side note, that is something I will not back down on. Climate change is real. It needs to be addressed through policy. But the idea of this conference actually is not to just kind of toot our own horn. It's to popularize and bring attention to conservative responses to climate change, because they are real, they exist, and they're kind of being swept under the rug right now. Not purposefully, just they don't get as much attention as more progressive-oriented solutions. So I think, mind you, I don't know enough climate science to know whether or not that these are efficacious
you can
solutions.
look at the graph, look at the data.
Yeah.
Yes.
What I'm saying is these conservative solutions, like individual like this is crazy. The idea of like selling off public lands to private owners for individual stewardship. It's interesting. I don't know if I necessarily believe it should happen, but these people should be invited to the table so that those individuals who would lean toward that idea, as opposed to mass government regulation, which is by and large a very liberal idea, can have a side to root for. There will never not be a partisan debate surrounding policy issues. That's just not going to happen. It will always be contentiously fought between two or more sides. Like rabidly, dogmatically, people are going to fight for their side, right? But right now, the way climate is discussed is, on the one hand, we have solution-oriented recognition of the truth of climate change, and on the other hand, we have the denial of truth of climate change. And I think that this side emerges by virtue of the fact that there aren't a lot of commonly publicized ideologically conservative reactions to climate change. So our idea is to bring those conservative responses to climate change and environmental degradation, bring them forward, put them out there so people understand that they don't have to work against their interests to recognize the very real truth of climate change, in the hopes that it'll pivot debate from whether or not climate change is true to, okay, what are we going to do about it? Because if we're all agreeing that climate change is true, it's more constructive than just arguing over what should be a bygone fact.
Well, what's really concerning to me is that the Paris Climate Accords was supposed to be symbolically, at least, that everyone came together, agreed that climate change is true.
Yeah.
Now we're gonna, at least in writing, take some action.
Yeah. I wish I had a greater understanding of what the Paris Climate Accords entail. I really should, but I haven't read the documentation, so I won't speak with authority there. But the way it was painted was, at the end of the day, this same partisan drivel, just like to go forward with the climate change Paris Accords is seen as progressivist and thereby ideologically anti-conservative. And if it's seen as such, then conservative people and candidates which rely on conservative votes, like Donald Trump, are just not going to back it. So what we're hoping to do with this conference is bring groups like, I think it's Conservatives for Responsible Stewardship. For example, the founder of the Tea Party, one of the founders of the Tea Party, Debbie Dooley, is a fervent environmentalist. Like, most people would not believe that, but she does an intense amount of work for climate restoration, as I understand it. So the idea is to bring people like her to campus and kind of piggyback on Berkeley's justly earned reputation as being a very progressivist place, in the hopes that we can draw attention to the fact that we're popularizing conservative issues. It sounds absurd, right? Berkeley touting conservative policy reactions, that's crazy, and that attracts attention. So the hope is, if we have enough of that out there, then we can pivot the debate from whether or not climate change is true, again, to what is our reaction to and policy response to climate change. Yeah. So those are two things which I think, in many ways, undermine the partisaning of truth, which happens as a result of media, as a result of the sports team-esque attitude we have towards policy. I just got hired on by our national organization, BridgeUSA, to be their head writer, to hopefully start a publication with them. I figure if we're producing our own media, which responsibly acknowledges its partisan leanings, we can, and again, this is a shot in the dark, right? Like, I hope to God it's going to work out, but at the end of the day, I also know that media is an impossible market to penetrate into because everybody already has their respective media sources. So I'm working with BridgeUSA to hopefully launch a publication that will recognize its partisanship. We have an in-house publication here at BridgeUSA at Berkeley being run by my former roommate, Sean Vernon, who's a very brilliant writer, very smart politico, And that's been going great, so you can expect to see articles being put out by that. And I was recently, I don't really know what my position is here, but I was recently taken on to work with a publication called the National Discourse, which is also doing the same, like, not centrist, but multi-partisan approach towards news media and recognition of partisan leaning in the production of fact and truth. So I think that there are many solutions forward. Those are just the ones that I'm embroiled in. I know that this is a massive movement. It's called the Bridge Movement. We're a part of it. There's plenty of people who are involved with it. Allsides.com, John Gables is doing some work with this, I think. Allsides.com is great. Like, that's a plug that I'll put in right now. It's phenomenal because it'll give you different partisan leanings on the same story. And it will, like, demonstrate to you what the partisan leaning of your respective source of information is. So that's fantastic. But, like, there are organizations like that are involved in this broader coalition that is working towards recognizing, like, the fact that our status quo is messed up and we need to fix it. So there are plenty of solutions going forward. They're all small steps. I don't think they'll necessarily fix the systemic flaws that have led us to the point of our status quo, but they're doing a damn good job of trying. And that's kind of all we can do right now is try, right? So there's no broad sweeping thing you can do that'll fix it, but I think all of the efforts that I'm involved in right now, I think all of the efforts that the Bridge Alliance is putting forward, and I'm sure there are other efforts I just haven't heard about, all of those are steps in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thanks so much for coming on.
No worries.
I wish you were wearing a different shirt.
Yeah, I actually messed up. So I didn't know, here, check this out. I didn't know that today was going to be a video podcast, and I actually forgot that it was today. I thought it was going to be tomorrow. So I showed up in my Stanford grandpa lounging around the house shirt and flip-flops and jeans.
Let's get a close-up.
Are we gonna get close? I rolled them up because it's kind of uncomfortable to walk around in here. Don't worry about it. This is not who I am. It's not who I am. This hair isn't who I am. I haven't cut it in like 2 months. I need to get at that. I'm turning into a Berkeley hippie. No, but yeah, I forgot that this was going to be a video podcast, and so here we are. Next time, if you have me back on, I will wear something more thematically appropriate, like my UCLA girlfriend shirt or my Cal Dad shirt.
I think that sounds way better.
Yeah. Anyway. All right, man. It's been good. Here. Cool.